Hello, this is Catherine Dubberly, the Answer Lady. Today I'm here to take your fears away about multicolored tuck stitch knitting on the double knitting board. I have a pattern out for sale at Vivaloom about making dishcloths with this method, and it's very lovely, but it looks a little complicated. It isn't really complicated, so what we're going to talk about today is how simple it is, how you accomplish it, and take the fear away of doing this wonderful and fun stitch. The base for tuck stitch is stockinette stitch, so we always start by using a row or two of stockinette as a base. What tuck really means is holding, that a few of the stitches are not knitted off. Those stitches are considered to be tucking. This is a stitch in a terminology borrowed from machine knitting, but it works wonderfully well on the double board. Here I knitted 2 rows of ordinary stockinette and then began tucking by failing to knit off every 4th stitch all the way across both boards. I'm going to do this for 2 rows. When these rows are complete, I wrap the next row in a new color. By this time there will be 3 loops of yellow on the needles that are tucking, and I will knit all 3 of those off after wrapping the next row of the alternate color. On this same row, which is the first row of color 2, I'll begin tucking, that is holding loops, on an alternate set of needles. In this case, I choose to do so on every 4th needle again, but I'm skewing the needles over by 2, so that the tucking needle is the center needle of the 3 that was previously in a group of 3 knitting in a row. Throughout the tucking process, all the needles that are not tucking are being knitted in completely normal stockinette. After knitting 2 rows of color 2, purple in this case, there will be 1 yellow loop from the last row of yellow and 2 purple loops on each of the needles that is tucking. Then we'll change colors and knit in color 3. In this case, it's going to be green. Now it's time to knit over the 3 loops on each needle that is tucking. These will be 2 purple and 1 yellow in this case, and begin tucking on another set of needles. I'm going back to the first set, the ones I used for the yellow tuck rows. For the pattern I'm demonstrating, 2 rows of each color are knitted, and those rows will be worked about the same, but there is a slight difference. Most stitches will be knitted off as normal stockinette. On the first of the 2 rows of each color, you will have multiple loops on the needle that's been tucking to knit off. On the second row of each color, you won't have multiple loops because you've already knitted them off, and the needles that were holding loops previously are now being knitted as normal stockinette stitches. What you will have is loops building up on the new needle, but you will ignore those until you change colors again. The work proceeds all the way to the end of the project in this manner, most of the time knitting most stitches as stockinette, some of the time simply not knitting them at all. What makes the interesting patterns is the frequency with which you change the needles that tuck, the number of rows you knit of each color, of the spacing of those needles, and so nearly infinite designs are possible. When knitting with multiple colors, every time the final row in that color is completed, break the yarn and lay the tail between the 2 rows of needles where it will be knitted into the work and hidden. So there you go. I'm sure you can see now that simply not knitting a stitch is not very difficult. A little bonus is that this fabric tends to grow a little bit in width and to be a little more deeply textured than plain stockinette. The difference is not that noticeable to the eye, but the texture gives the fabric great scrubbing qualities, which makes for wonderful washing cloths, and the tendency to grow in width is a wonderful help when knitting blankets. By the way, The loom that I demonstrated most of this on is the one that I created in another recent video about making a new loom out of a loom with a broken peg. You might want to look that up in case you have the same problem. It actually knits really well. I won't say it's the most beautiful loom ever, but I'm still glad I have it. Happy knitting. Bye now.